right. We're going to get started just to respect everybody's time. For those of you who I don't know, I send you a lot of emails. My name is Rebecca Latham. I'm the Executive Director of Communications for the district. We just wanted to thank you all for joining us tonight for our Partners in Learning session. We have a great session for you all this evening, and we're really grateful that you took the time to learn with us today. Tonight, we welcome Dr. John Frampton. He is the co-founder, clinical psychologist, and school psychologist at Formative Psychological Services. The focus of tonight's parent session is on healthy technology use in the home. In our schools, technology is used to support student learning. Our one-to-one iPads are learning tools that help students create, collaborate, and think critically. Teachers make intentional decisions about when technology supports instruction and when it is best for students to step away from screens. Students also learn a lot about digital citizenship skills so that they can use technology responsibly and safely at school and in their home lives. But again, tonight we're going to focus a little bit on technology use in the home, and we're excited to bring Dr. John Frampton's experience on this very important topic. So thank you all for being here.
And thank you for that introduction, Rebecca. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. Happy Wednesday night. It's really a privilege for me to be here with you. This is, at Formative Psychological Services, we do a few different things. We provide a lot of individual therapy to kids through the lifespan, families and couples. We do school-based neuropsych assessments. But this is the one that I get really extra excited about, and that's being able to connect with parent communities, and have been doing it for almost 3 decades, getting to that point. Um, and it's with the idea, and that's my goal tonight, that you're going to walk away, at whatever time you need to walk away, with a little bit of a deeper understanding of how our kids relate to technology and what impact it may be having on them, as well as perhaps a different approach that you want to implement within your own home. And I'm going to guess there's going to be some heterogeneity about that. And that's how I think about this, right? While we're all in the same boat together facing this issue, we're all probably going to handle it in a little bit of a different way. And I'm good with that. It's kind of what, right? Our differences is what makes the bouquet present itself so well. So really appreciate your time. A quick Rebecca mentioned, my experience, and I'll share with you a little bit of what my experience has been so you can understand what potential biases I have, and also just what my background and experience with it has been. Moved here to Chicago after being a school psych in upstate New York and a clinical psych in upstate New York, near Rochester, New York, in a K through 12 school district. And I got to work in a therapeutic day school that's a part of the Northwest Suburban Special Education Organization, working and about half of our students were students with Maryville Academy. So we're kids who were wards of the state, and had a wonderful experience serving those kids and families. And then started working a private practice with Dr. Michael Fry out in Arlington Heights. And then with kids happening, decided to get a day job again, and joined Niles Central, a therapeutic day high school that's a part of District 219 over there in Niles, and was became the administrator for that program and the leader of that program. And that's really when I got real interested. It was about that time that people began to have one-to-one devices, and became really interested in what types of impact it was having, as well as beginning to experience it as a parent. Currently, I've got a 21-year-old who's a junior in college, a ninth grader in high school here in Chicago, and a seventh grader in a different school. And so I would say that I'm somewhat in the thick of it, in terms of helping teach, along with my wife, Kate, who's the co-founder of Formative Psych Services, helping to teach our boys what their relationship is going to be with technology. And so throughout this presentation, I'm hoping to provide you with what knowledge I have of the research, and what that's telling us, Some of what I have to say is based on common sense. And some of it is based on my how I marry my personal experience raising kids in a digital world with my particular value system and what the profession that I've got. And so really happy to be able to share that with you tonight. I believe that if some burning questions come up in the chat, I've asked the team to just let me know and to interrupt so I can hit those questions. My plan is to be done, somewhere around 15 minutes before the end. My understanding is that we're done at 8:30, so somewhere around 8:15. And if I've got that wrong, somebody please let me know. Um, so that I can take some questions at the end. And here's how I've got tonight set up. I've got three things on the agenda. Not every section is labeled as such, but this is just kind of how I feel the presentation flows. And that's first, I'm going to set the table with some ideas about parenting, some ideas about kids, some ideas about us and our relationship with technology. And I'm going to spend a few minutes kind of setting the table because as we go through the evidence of how we know technology, social media, things like that are impacting our kids, we're going to tie it to some of the notions that we're going to talk about as we set the table for the rest of the presentation. And then I'm going to do what pretty much every good parenting book does, and I'm going to create some anxiety in all of us. I'm going to create a little bit of despair about the nature of things, and both things that I think we have a lot of evidence for, as well as things that I wish that they were being talked about more, and that we've got some emerging evidence of. And then finally, and to me, this is what I think we're here for, is to talk about what hopeful action can we as parents engage in our home to foster a healthy relationship for our kids with technology. And so let's get after it. I'm going to jump right in and let's first set the table. And there's three plates here that we're going to use to set the table. And the first one is the parenting framework. Okay. And the parenting framework that I use is with an attempt to simplify parenting. And obviously, as I talk about it, I'm going to oversimplify it as us having three roles with our kids, and they're represented with the three illustrations that you see on this slide. In this parenting framework, our first role as a parent is that we love our children. Now, this often comes easy for many of us. It doesn't come easy for some for all sorts of different reasons. But for many of us, that idea that we love our kids, it happens while the child is in the womb and stays with us for the lifetime, right? And that's our attachment, that's our care and our compassion and motivation to protect and nurture this human being for the rest of our living days. The next role that we provide our kids is to set limits, right? And that's where we're going to be talking about technology is how do we do that? What are some ways in which we can do it that are non-rupturing to the relationship, that are healthy? What types of limits should we be setting and those types of things? As I talk about limit setting, I want to be really clear that I take a more of an authoritative parenting approach. And I think of us coming up alongside our kids to set limits, right? And as we do that, we do it in really a non-controlling type of way that's values based or principles based. And we serve, right, depending upon the age of our child, we serve as that external regulation. And we're going to see that that becomes really important in what we think of as a really high or dopamine rich type of situation when kids are with technology. That our external regulation is likely to be necessary for our kids. And it's necessary so that we can protect them, and that limit setting is going to come from a place of care. I think it's important for us to remember right? Really, that the Latin origin, if they break those rules, right, it's important for us to remember the Latin origin of that word discipline is to teach. That are any sort of action that we have in response to our kids choosing to break that limit or being unable to abide by it, we want to respond in a way that's going to teach them and reinforce the values that we're trying to impart upon them. Okay. And to me, the third role, so we have loving our kids, we're going to set limits. The third role to me is the hardest, and especially with technology, and that is to make our kids more independent each day. Right? We want to operate in a way as a parent that we're going to foster for them self-monitoring. We want to operate in a way that gradually we can release some of our oversight and some of our responsibility for supervision and structure for them. We want to foster in them that self-awareness of noticing, how does technology make me feel? How is it serving me? What does it do for me when I'm done with it? How does it impact my ability to follow the rules that have been set for me and those types of things? So I want you to keep that piece in mind in terms of that parenting framework. The second piece that we're going to set the table with today that I want us to keep in mind is our mindset. I want us all, right? Some of us probably came tonight just really curious and open because this is an area that we feel like we haven't done enough work on. Maybe we've got younger kids and we just want to be able to prepare for the future. Maybe we've got middle schoolers and we're wondering if some of the decisions we've made aren't working for us, all those types of things, right? And if we're doing that, we might be coming in with a little bit of a confirmation bias, looking for something to reinforce what we're thinking. And what I want us all to do is come into this presentation tonight with an open mind, right? And I want to highlight this idea that minds are malleable, right? Our attitudes, our mindset can be easily shifted. And I'm going to give two examples that are evident in the research to highlight this. One is if I asked you to think of the last two digits of your phone number, and I'll encourage you to take a second to think about the last two digits of your phone number. I'm doing that now. If you did that, and then I asked you in this format, we're not going to do this live, but if I asked you a question, take a guess as to how many African nations are a part of the United Nations. Now, some of you may know the answer to that, and I would be impressed because I had to look it up. But what we know is there would be a strong correlation between the size of the number that the last two digits of your phone number creates and the guess that you would provide. There would be a strong correlation between those two. In a moment, by anchoring your mind on that number prior to guessing the follow-up question, it would have a significant influence on the answer you would provide. I'm going to give an even more powerful example of how malleable our mindset is and the power of the impact it can have on us. And this is coming out of the research that's been done by Dr. Ellen Langer, who's probably an expert in this area. And she did a very interesting study where she took three groups of people with type 2 diabetes. She placed all three groups into separate rooms and provided them with a similar activity. And the thing that they manipulated was the time. Their group one was in a room where the time ran a little fast. Group two was in a room where it was real time, and group three was in a room where the time ran slower. They tracked the subjects in this study. They tracked their blood sugar levels during the course of a 90-minute period. And what the researchers were so impressed by and surprised by is that blood sugar levels did not follow real time. It followed perceived time. And so not only, right, does our attitudes or opinions or guesses of a number get impacted by our mindset, but our metabolic function can get impacted by perception, right? And I say that all because obviously as we're talking about technology, whether we're thinking about video games, whether we're thinking about a particular TV show, the shorts, social media, other apps on the devices, it's important for us to think about, okay, if my child is consuming this information and these are the ads that they're seeing on a repeated basis, then the example that comes up for me right away, where I'm a sports lover, my boys have all been into sports. So we're watching the NCAA tournaments, and the number of pharmaceutical commercials that come on during the course of one game is, I would guess it to be somewhere between 7 to 10 commercials. And how is that pushing my mindset, right? And how much awareness do I have? How mindful am I being about how that might impact any potential decision that I make medically down the road as I'm considering any sort of medical treatment? And that's just a quick example of it. The last has to do with us, and I'm going to ask us to take a moment of reflection. And here I'll set the table for that. And I've got a picture, obviously, of Mahatma Gandhi here. And there's a parable that goes along with Mahatma Gandhi, and it's this. A mother and a son who reside together are having a bit of a conflict. The mother is really concerned about the addictive behavior her son is showing around sweets. He cannot control himself. He's really struggling. Anytime she brings anything into the home, even if she hides it, he inevitably finds it, consumes it all in one sitting, and doesn't seem to have the ability to manage it. And she knows that the one person that he looks up to is Gandhi, and so she voyages to go see him, is able to see him, brings her son in front of Gandhi, tells him what's going on, and asks for his help. Can you please give my son some helpful guidance to manage this addiction he seems to have? And Gandhi looks and actually doesn't respond for a moment, and finally does respond and asks the mother, can you please come back in 2 weeks? And she's a little perplexed. I would imagine a little bit frustrated, maybe a little disappointed, and they leave. And 2 weeks later, sure enough, they return. And she says the problem is continuing. Can you now provide us with any sort of support or provide my son with some guidance? And Gandhi looks in the son's in her son's eyes and says, "Son, you need to get this together. You need to stop eating sweets and learn how to regulate yourself around sweets." And the boy is a little, Gandhi's really direct with him. The boy's a little shaken and nods his head and accepts the feedback and accepts the challenge to improve in this area. And the mother asks the question we're all wondering, which is, hey, we were here 2 weeks ago. Couldn't we have knocked this out then? And Gandhi responds, well, I was struggling with a bit of a sweet tooth myself, and I needed to get it figured out before I helped your son. I'm going to guess you know where I'm going with this. And I'm going to ask you each to take a moment to reflect on your technology use, right? Because as we know, it's not what we say, it is what we do that gets learned. And so, even just briefly doing an audit, where's my phone in the morning as everybody's getting up, getting ready? Where's my phone as they're arriving home? Where's my device during dinner? Where is it for their bedtime? Where is it for my bedtime? And what's my relationship with technology? Is there an app that I'm spending an inordinate amount of time on? Right? Um, there is no judgment on this. And this is really, I think of this as a safe moment for all of us to reflect on it. And I'm going to guess we're all over the map as a community in terms of what our relationship with it is. One of the things that I like to be mindful of, especially as our kids are younger, so in those early elementary school years, one of the things that I do in the morning, after I get a cup of coffee, say good morning to the boys as they're rising, is I'm reading the paper on my phone. And when they were younger, I was pretty deliberate in stating what I was doing. And it's because all they can see is me looking at my phone, right? And I'm setting a model for them that becomes behavior that they're going to internalize later on. Taking a look at your own screen time is a can be surprising. We often underestimate how much time we're actually spending. And thinking about if you find that it's more time than you care for, doing the work that Gandhi did in that parable prior to changing anything in your home, so that you can speak from experience and understand what it takes to make some of those changes. And the unfortunate truth is, we're the products also with those phones, and it's going to be an important ongoing process for us to reflect on how we're using them. Okay. Thank you for allowing me to set the table with those three items. Now I want to get into four primary areas of impact that we know technology is having. This isn't all inclusive, but it does highlight, I think, four really important areas that we want to be aware of. Our social arena and social deprivation, what's happening with our sleep, how it's impacting our attentional functioning, and some addictive qualities of the technology as well. Okay. So social deprivation is the first one, and I've got a picture here of a baseball team, and this is not the baseball team that I'm referring to, but I want to share an experience with you, and I bet that some of you can relate to this. A few years ago, my middle son was on a travel baseball team. We had an out-of-state tournament. We were with 14 other families, all the boys. We had a game at 10 a.m. There wasn't another game until like 3 p.m. And so we had time to go sit down on a patio for lunch. All the parents sit down on one table, all the players sit down at another long table, and you could hear a pin drop at their table. Every boy had a phone out and was doing exactly what you're seeing in this picture. There was no interaction, there was no conversation, there wasn't even, sharing and laughing together what they were viewing. It was just quiet. About 5, 10 minutes in, and I was really thankful to this parent. One of the mothers got up, let us know what she was doing, which was to go and collect the phones. And she brought a basket around and asked for everybody's phone. Most of the boys complied right away. There were a couple that were a little bit more disgruntled, but looked at the at the look in her eyes and obeyed pretty quickly, gave her the phone. And I'd say it was within, right, these 12-year-old boys, I'd say it was within 10 minutes they were playing duck, duck, goose around the table. Now, probably not the behavior I would hope for in a restaurant, um, um, but they were relating. They were present with each other. They were laughing and giggling, acting like children, right? And they weren't, because we were on the patio, they weren't disrupting the environment too much. But it is that idea of displacement of in-person time. It is causing a major deprivation of our social experiences. And in our minds, right, our brain is an organ, and if we don't use it, we begin to lose it. And there is practice that comes with empathy and kindness and mirroring what somebody is experiencing when you're actively listening to them, with conflict resolution, with coping with hurt feelings, and all those types of things. I had the great experience this past summer of being able to go home, which is near Rochester, New York, where both of my groups of friends are. Right. I've got my high school buddies that I got to see. Several of them still live in Rochester, New York. So we were able to hang out as fun. My kids got to meet them. We got to joke around a bunch. And then serendipitously, there was a college reunion. My college friends were in town for a little bit of reunion, and I got to see them on the same trip. And we laughed and we reminisced about all of the silly and stupid things that we did together and all the fun that we had together. And what strikes me is that we're beginning to understand that in this digital age, our kids are missing out on 50% of those experiences as compared to prior to the introduction of the one-to-one experiences. And that is remarkably sad. right? And it's that displacement of those social experiences. That's, if we think about the most basic human need, which is to belong physically and to build those interpersonal skills in the social context, it's one of the pieces that we're missing out on the most. And here's a 23 kind of analysis, and these ages are older, so this doesn't fit, what our age group is, and perhaps we've got, I'm imagining maybe 6 to 14, 15-year olds here present, parents of those ages. But I feel comfortable in saying that we may be close to what these numbers indicate. And what we have here is a graph that shows from 2003 to about 2020, our daily average time with friends in minutes. And I'm going to focus on the blue line because that blue line represents some of our high schoolers, sophomores, juniors, seniors, as well as some of our young adults. And we can see that with that introduction, in about 2009 of these one-to-one smartphones, we start to see, and even earlier than that, we see this trend downward of how much time we're spending with friends. One of the things that I find most remarkable about this graph is that if you look at 2018 and even 2017 up until 2019, it is a precipitous drop. We're losing minutes by the day, going from just under 100 to just 40s, right? So we lost like 50% of our time with our friends for this age group. What's remarkable to me is that from 2019 to 2020, we were in a global pandemic and we had to, but there wasn't a change in the line in the graph. It dropped just as precipitously with a global pandemic as it did the year before. Right. And so we can see the impact that it's having in really all age groups. My age group, starting and again, just before the pandemic, we're seeing a decrease in the number of folks who are with each other. Right. And this impacts males and females differently, right? Girls are, if we're spending more time online, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but girls are going to be more impacted because they engage in more visual social comparison. More often, their conflict can be characterized, their conflict with friends can be characterized as relationally aggressive instead of physically aggressive, which is more typically male, and that's more available online. And the impact with boys is that they're having more trouble launching, right? They're more susceptible to that idea of experiencing failure to launch. And so that social deprivation is really an area that's meaningfully hit. A second area that we know is sleep deprivation. And all of us know what our kids are like when they've been deprived of sleep, particularly the younger that they are. And there's good reason for it. All of us struggle a little bit more when we don't get as much sleep, and especially when there's technology in the room or it's somehow available to them, it is impacting the amount of sleep that our kids are getting. And what happens, specifically what happens when kids get less sleep is their amygdala, that kind of fear center of the brain, is hyper aroused, right? It's easier to reach the threshold of being triggered. And so we see this emotional lability and emotional dysregulation that just comes on much more quickly. And interestingly, the part of our brain that helps us when that amygdala gets triggered is our prefrontal cortex. And our prefrontal cortex is that, right, kind of that executive operator for us. It helps us with planning and impulse control and thinking things through before we act. And there's evidence that when we're sleep deprived, that we've got less connection. There's less communication between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And from there, we can understand that it impacts working memory, problem solving, concentration, all those things, of course, that we need to learn. And if it becomes chronic, then it starts to hit, right, our immune system, and so we start to develop a vulnerability to more chronic illness. So Instead of looking at national data, I pulled this from Lane Tech High School. My two older boys have both gone there. This came out in their newspaper a year or two ago, where they did a survey of the students. Not all the students responded, so I can't speak to the absolute representativeness of this data. Please be aware of that. But there were a number, hundreds of students did reply in this 9 to 12 grade high school. And and one of the things that stands out to me is that most of the kids, over a little over a third, are getting about 6 hours of sleep a night. But then 1 in 5 are getting five or less. If we just say with those kids that are getting 6 hours a night in 1 week, right, we can add it up. In 1 week, they're missing a night and a half of sleep each week. And we can imagine the impact that that's having on them overall. And so that certainly becomes a concerning issue and a target for us when we're thinking about limits within the home around technology. Okay, attention fragmentation. I hope each of you are doing a great job with attention right now. I'm going to imagine there's things going around in your home that are also demanding your attention. So I'm just thankful for any of it that I get. We've certainly seen an increase nationally in the number of and the percent of kids between the ages of 3 and 17 that are receiving a diagnosis of ADHD. And it's increased from just under 8% in 2005 to well over 11% um, in um, um, in 2022. And so we're likely over 12% if the data is current and it's following that same trend, which I believe that it is. And our world is accommodating us, right? Shows are getting a little bit shorter. Songs have gotten a little bit shorter for a lot of musicians. And I think most obvious is that our newspaper articles have gotten a lot shorter. Um, we know, and it's important to think about not even the obvious incidents of attention fragmentation where we get a notification, but even when we have our phone out. So my phone right now is down and to my left on the table, and it's more so that I can see the time because it's a little bit blocked on my screen right now. I don't get hardly any notifications on mine, and that's on purpose. I don't have any social media accounts. That's on purpose, and that's really a personal preference. I do miss out on some things, I will tell you, that bother me, and so I understand why people have it. But just having it out, and we're really thoughtful about this as therapists in our practice, that having it out and present impacts our ability to complete cognitive tasks, right? And so certainly when we're testing somebody, we're not allowing them to have a phone out on the table because it's going to demand some of their attention. Okay. Um, if it's out in social situations, if it's visible during a conversation, we're less likely to smile during the conversation, per the research. And so just the presence of that device has a meaningful impact on our ability to attend. Now, I'll share with you, with a lot of these things, I believe we can, if we're losing it, right? So if I'm somebody who's on my phone 60 times a day and it's fragmenting my attention, I do believe that we can change course and see the trajectory go the other way. And the research would support that. And I'll give you a quick example. A researcher took two large groups of kids who were heavy users of individual devices, and these kids were in about the seventh and eighth grade. Um, they were assessed in their cognitive ability and ability to attend. They were then sent off to a camp, two very similar camps. One group was not allowed to take their individual devices. One was. They came back and assessed everything again, and there was significant improvement in the kids who were device free for the week-long camp. And so there is ability to get it back. Um, The last thing that I'll say about this, there isn't a bullet point on it, and right, this is common sense, but the research really supports it too. That if we are heavy consumers of those shorts of TikTok, YouTube shorts, those types of things, it is associated with negative brain impact, right? There's diminished working memory, there's diminished cognitive control, in those types of things. This is a couple years old, but again, kind of going along that attention. Our early young teenagers are getting approximately 237 notifications per day on average. So if we break that up, right, that if they were even checking those during the school day, which unfortunately does happen sometimes, we're talking every 4 minutes during the course of a 16-hour day. They're getting a notification, and so their ability to engage in that deep thought if the phone is around and they're hearing that buzz sound or the ding becomes really disrupted. Okay. The last piece, the last major piece that we're going to talk about is addiction. And I think, my hope is that this hits a much smaller percentage of kids, right? And we're in a moment, we'll talk about what kind of components make up this idea of behavioral addiction. It is an issue, and it's because these devices have become incredibly effective at capturing our attention. And they use a couple of different ways to do that. One is they use that variable ratio reinforcement schedule. My best analogy for that is my golf game. Every 3 to 10 swings, maybe I'll actually hit the ball well, and it feels so good. It just keeps me coming back to the game. And that's how gambling works, right? That's how people get addicted to gambling is they're through that kind of intermittent reinforcement. They're not sure when it's going to happen again. Um, I mentioned a little bit earlier that, when we're setting limits with our kids, one of the things I want us to remember, and it's not to excuse it or to change the limits, but to provide us with understanding and strategizing, and I'll clarify that in a moment. But it's important for us to remember that our kids are in this highly or dopamine rich situation when they're with their technology. If they're playing Fortnite on the Xbox, if they're on a social media, and if they're watching the shorts, as they're approaching the device or when they get home and they haven't had access to the device because they're getting home from school, dopamine is already entering their system as they're beginning to think about accessing the device, right? And that dopamine, that doesn't, some people, I think it's been falsely reported that that's what provides us with pleasure. And that's not necessarily true. The dopamine is what gives us motivation, it's what gives us desire and urge to have, right? So if when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to have sugar cereal, and so when we were at the grocery store and I saw the Frosted Flakes and Tony the Tiger on there, bam, a little bit of dopamine came up, and I would ask, could this be the time that I'll get the yes answer? And of course, it wouldn't be. And now I appreciate that. Um, um, but it is that dopamine rich environment, and why and there's a new book, a newish book out called Dopamine Kids by Michaeline Duclaff that I would highly recommend because she wrote Hunt Gather Parent or Gather Hunt Parent. I may have that title a little bit off, but she's just wonderful at providing really practical types of recommendations for families and how to build the culture, especially around technology. And in this book, she talks about ultra processed foods as well. Um, but she really highlights this kind of system that's happening for our kids, and why I think it helps with our strategy is that knowing that we're setting limits from a place of love, from a place of protection and care, we really want to align with our child against these products, right? We no longer want to be the product. We want to benefit from the device that we have, learn to control it, to not allow it to control us. But when we understand the science behind it, we can better align with our kid and maybe, again, still be firm with the limits, but understand why they're having such a hard time coming down from it, why their mood at the end of an hour and a half long on a Saturday afternoon, Roblox or Fortnite stint, their mood is a little bit depressed or they're a little bit more irritable than they were prior to engaging in that activity. And it's in part because of this repeated dopamine hit that their system was getting. Now it's gone, right? Now it's gone. And now you want me to be bored? Oh man, the system is not going along with that. The system is definitely not going along with that. And so, for addiction, there's some components, some diagnostic components that we really look out for. And I did have friends of mine come into the office to talk about one of their kids. They've got three kids. Two of them had done fine with technology. One of them had been swallowed up by gaming. His grades were starting to drop. He was gaming in place of doing some of his homework. He was agitated when he had to come with the family and just seemingly kind of crawling in his skin until he was able to get home and access the technology and access the gaming again, right? There was almost these withdrawal symptoms while he was there. And that's the conversation we had, that this had really entered the realm of a behavioral addiction, and they likely needed to work with somebody, and they needed to be really thoughtful about how they were going to help their kiddo navigate the addiction that they'd been swallowed up in. Okay. Okay. Now we're shifting to I got, I think, about four other areas here that are being impacted. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them. And these are things that we know are happening, but we're not really talking a whole lot about them. And the first one is this idea of awe. And awe I think of as that really profound and kind of meaningful emotion that gets triggered by something we experience or see in our environment. And it feels vast and it feels surprising and even overwhelmingly wonderful, right? And for me, I'm blessed because I feel like I've got a bunch of moments of awe that I can remember both from my childhood and as an adult, where you feel kind of this transcendent experience, right? And one of them that stands out is camping with my family, and it was freezing cold, and we're in the middle of nowhere, Canada, on a lake, and my dad's making hot chocolate, and there's a mist sitting on top of the lake, and this big moose, starting to step into the lake, far enough away that we weren't freaked out. But it was just, I still remember that, and it brings up emotions for me even to recall that, and I want you to take a moment to recall that as well. And why those experiences are so important is because of the transcendent experience of it. If you practice spirituality, likely somewhere in your spirituality, you get to experience that. For families who don't practice spirituality, we do seek it in other ways. And I do, it's a really important experience because it allows us to understand in a very healthy way how small we are in this universe, and to feel connected to others who are experiencing the awe at the same time. And why this is being impacted is that, this intense, kind of short form online content that our kids can become exposed to can diminish or take away their capacity to experience awe, because it's conditioning that brain again with those dopamine hits and things. It's conditioning their brain that I need constant newness and a rapid reward, right? It's harder for me to sit and experience this awesome thing that's happening around me. Okay. Another one that I'm hoping some of you would have heard. I feel like this one is getting traction, is myopia, right? And this is happening because, and this is something we've had to press our kids on, so that they're not watching TV on their phones, and teaching them, even our 21-year-old, saying, no, man, when get at least get the iPad to watch that if you have to. But if a TV is available, that's where you should be watching your shows. And it's because when we're looking up close, especially on something as small as a phone, right? The image isn't focused properly on the edges of our retina, which are like the light sensing part of the eye. And so that blurred image causes our eyes to grow longer over time. In the World Health Organization, and I've looked this up so many times because to me, we should be screaming from the rooftops about it, but the World Health Organization is predicting that by 2050, so 2050, that if the current trend continues, half of our population will be nearsighted. And it says this is a contributor to that. Now, there's a secondary contributor, and it's to things like being outside, right? And being able to be outside and being able to view a large area and train the eye not to just grow longer, but to keep a healthy shape. As I'm saying that, right? I'm painting a picture probably of the doom of technology. I want everyone to know that I feel like technology is a gift and it is a wonder. I don't think we do a great job of when we introduce technology of protecting our children from it in a helpful way. And there are certainly other factors that in the world that are contributing to some of these things. We do know that technology is having an impact in the way we're talking about today. It's not the sole impact, is what I'm saying. This next one has to do with narcissism. So, not a narcissistic personality disorder. I'm talking about the trait of narcissism. There is some emerging research showing that there is an uptick of narcissism in our young people. And it's being measured in a few creative ways. Some of it's just by how often we refer to ourselves and using the words me and I in all of our communication. It is, one of the factors that's being pinpointed is the selfie culture in which we live, as one piece in the social media, right? If I'm thinking about if I have Instagram and, I am really proud of this talk tonight and want to post it, and am just grateful for the experience. How much time am I going to take to post this thing that's about me? Right? And if we think about kids who want to be able to present this particular image on social media, we can imagine how much time that's required to think about themselves as compared to the way it used to be. The other piece that I think of, right? So there's other things outside of technology that are influencing this. Parenting styles, right? A bit ago, we got hit over the head with our kids needing to have more self-esteem. And so how did that change our interactions with them? So we can pinpoint some of those things too. I blame things like travel sports for my personal experience. The weekend becomes about the kid and not about somebody's birthday that's, in the extended family, things like that. So there's certainly a broader cultural shift in individualism. We can point to some of these other things, but we are making the connection in terms of how technology is impacting this growing trait of narcissism. What is known and isn't talked about enough is just kids needing to take risks, right? That and what's happening with the technology is this is the replacement, right? That it is displacing kids being outside, roaming their communities, taking some risks on the playground, and those types of things. And we know that risk taking can develop confidence, it can develop problem solving, it activates important neural pathways. And it really fosters in kids a growth mindset that they can, right? They can figure these things out. It allows them to assess a risk and know what's a little bit too risky and what's not. And we can be really creative in our communities about how to allow kids to take some risks. The one stat that I'll throw out there that decades ago we had the majority of kids walking, even second graders walking to school by themselves without supervision. I want to say it was in the ballpark of 60-70% of kids. And today that number is maybe 10%, right? So from 6 or 7 out of 10 to maybe 1 out of 10. Certainly, some things have happened, cars, more traffic, those types of things, maybe further distance from the local school, but still a marked decrease. And having our kids out and about and being able to take some risks is something that's being missed. Um, Decline in math and reading, all sorts of reasons for that. It really lines up. This is for 13 to 18-year-olds, so this is more so pointed at our junior high and high schoolers. And we know that legislation may be coming to eliminate phones from schools in Illinois in a year or two. Um, that's being deliberated currently, I believe. But we know that kids who, on average, high school age kids are using their phones about 1.5 hours during the school day. And so it's a natural conclusion that some of our math and reading scores are going to be hit. So that's our despair, folks. Any burning questions? I'll be quiet just for a quick moment as we transition to what can we do, right? This, and here's our hopeful action. What can we do about this? And I'm going to keep rolling. Jump in if there is a particular question. Again, I'll make sure that I'm done by 8:10, 8:15 or so to allow time for some of the specific questions to get answered. And here's where, I'm going to offer some recommendations. The first one is to think about, and this is one of the things that I think gets displaced by technology use, is this independent, unstructured playtime. All right. The importance of kids being able to explore. And the example that I'll think of, I live here in Chicago, and one of the ways in which we try and do that, and does it provide some harrowing moments? Yes, it does, is allowing our kids, after they've been taught to ride their bikes around the city and to know where, to know how, to take the defensive approach, all those types of things. But getting to explore the city on their own, and then meeting a friend at a playground, without our supervision, those types of things. To offer unsupervised opportunities to be and to again take some risks and do those types of things. To me, one of the most influential things that, and you guys are a school community of parents, is and knowing, I think with the introduction of Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, I think with some of the policy coming out, I think with some of the discoveries that, right, Meta was hiding research showing that their platforms were having negative impacts on the mental health of kids. I think it's more and more palatable for us to wait to get a smartphone for a child. And I think one of the difficulties we've had in the past doing that, and I experienced this, is when we were one of the last ones for our oldest to get a smartphone for him. And there became more and more pushback, and there was more and more pressure on us to eventually do that, which we eventually did in the eighth grade. Um, and when I look back, if we had done this, if we had created a social pact, I think the other parents would have done the same thing. I think everybody would have been relieved, right? It's kind of like, and in thinking about a smartphone in particular for your child, imagine going to the salesman and him saying, well, this device here is going to cost you $1,000, and your child will be on it maybe about 40 hours a week, with no particular benefit, lots of risks to their well-being, to their overall well-being, and it's going to be a pain in the butt for you to manage, right? What a sale. So can we wait? Yeah, I think that we can wait. And there's two platforms. I think about Wait Until Eighth is an organization, and I think about Smartphone Free Childhood as another online organization that help facilitate this type of pact, where a group of parents whose kids are friends, and yes, may have different opinions, and there may need to be compromise and those types of things in particular situations where somebody wants to get one earlier, et cetera, et cetera. But we can get groups of people to sign these pacts in order to relieve some of the feelings of being left out with our kids, and some of the pressure that you as parents experience in making that purchase. Um, so let's talk a little bit about family screen rules. And as we're talking about these, the first thing that I want everybody to be aware of is the third person effect, right? That as I'm talking about these impacts, if any of you experience, which I do from time to time, as I'm learning more and more and participating in these types of webinars, if any of you experience, well, gosh, we really insulate our kids, and they're probably not as impacted by X as some of these other kids are or their friends are. That is what we call the third person effect. Now, is there a chance that's true? Yeah, there's a chance that's true. It's a chance that you're doing something in particular that's insulating them and protecting them more than others. More than likely, they are and or you are being impacted as much, but we fall into this third person effect where we feel like, well, we got this, and it's really these others that are struggling with it. And so I would approach all this information, again, thinking about that mindset, I would approach it with curiosity and reflection. How is this impacting me? So, some basic guidelines that I've read and have learned and that I have experienced, when I read all the research, this is more so for older children and teens. When we think about cumulative screen time after school, that 2 hours is the limit. When we get past that 2 hour mark, and even 2 hours is a little bit much for me. I'm a little bit more prude when it comes to screen time. But when we read the research, it's when we surpass the 2 hours that we start to see a decline in mood, and or other areas of the child's functioning. I would highly recommend that at some point the family is completing a family media plan exercise. There's a few out there. The American Academy of Pediatrics has one on their website. I think it's good. I don't think it's as good as the one that they used to have, and I'm going to show you the one they used to have here in a moment. It is more flexible and more customizable, so maybe I'm giving it the short straw here. I just appreciated the way that they set up their initial one. And while we're talking about it, I'll show it to you. I'm going to skip ahead here. So this was probably about 10 years ago. This was a media plan that I did with our oldest son. And what I liked about it is it really aligned with that parenting framework, right? Where we get to come up alongside our child and discover the limits together. And it can be values based for the child. And so how it works is you back yourself into how much time we're going to allow you to have on screens. He was a gamer. Not too, we were conservative about the social media even back then, but man, he loved to game and he had a couple friends who liked to game. That's how we connected socially. And that's where our management with him came. And so when we take the 24-hour day, right, we plug in sleep. Well, let's get the recommended 9 hours. He's growing at that point, right? We're already down to 15 hours. You got to go to school. So that's 8 hours. Bam, we're down to 7 hours left. He was involved in soccer, so he was doing that almost every day. And when you count transportation and practice time, that's another 2 hours of the day. And then we put in some of the things that just have to happen: homework, eating, personal care, nighttime routine. I don't think that one's on there, but it probably should have been. A little bit of reading, which is a family value. So get a half hour of reading in. So how much time we got left? And we were left with an hour. And he had goals of being a soccer player in high school. And so that was a value of his that he was working towards that. And so when we got there and we backed ourselves in, we had 1 hour left. And bam, there's the limit. And it wasn't, right, it wasn't set in a way that wasn't conducive to him. It was set in more of a collaborative, let's take care of the things that you want to make sure happen, that you want. Let's take care of the things that you want to see happen for yourself and see what's left. And that'll be the amount of time you get to have. Okay. Some simple rules: bedrooms, media free. That's a no-brainer. Their smartphones now come with built-in controls. There are apps, and Apple as well provides ways for parents to have a family plan so that you can set time limits where if they reach their max, the time limit goes, or excuse me, that app goes away, and they would need a passcode in order to keep it going. I think it's really important that there is just media-free time in the family. And, I think meals is the one that seems most logical to me. And to think about, does that mean that my cell phone gets put down on the table, turned over next to me? I would encourage that not to be the case, given the research that some of our attention is going to go there, that it will detract from our ability to fully be with the people that we love and with our family members. Right? Turning off notifications after a certain time. I think there are cultural factors that we need to be aware of. I think whether we're talking SES, whether we're talking about people of color, that there are going to be different vulnerabilities and different thoughts about whether families of Asian descent have more of a collectivist type of approach, whereas Americans are a little bit more individualistic. And so I do think it's important to see that, through a particular cultural lens for your particular family. In terms of younger kids and what's appropriate, certainly the American Academy of Pediatrics has rules, right? No screens up until 18 months. Maybe we're watching something like Sesame Street or something brief between 18 months and 2 years. And then we're just not crossing that, 1 hour period of time between like 2 and 6 years of age. Right? Play should be the central focus of the child's development during that period of time. And I'll note, right, that I've seen 12-year-olds that I would be very concerned about providing any screen time to. And I've seen 6-year-olds who I'm thinking, yeah, they could probably handle a smartphone today and know how to regulate it, right? And that's what these 5 C's questions considers in terms of especially the media that you're going to watch or the screen use that you're going to allow your child to have. You got to know your child, right? If your child is really rigid and struggles to make transitions, screen time may need to be more delayed, and there might need to be more structure on how to off ramp them from the experience of getting those dopamine hits that they're going to experience, right? We want to be aware of the content that they're consuming. And for me, the best resource is Common Sense Media. They give a recommendation on the age of both video games and TV shows, movies, etc. Then they invite kids to respond. What age do the kids think? And then they invite parents to respond. And so you get these 3 data points about how appropriate it is. But again, you need to know your child. And I'll tell you, my oldest, in terms of like horror movies and things like that, he was able to consume those at a much younger age, still within the recommended realm. But I've got another kid in the family who we had to wait longer because for whatever reason, the horror movie, it impacted them and those images stuck with them longer. And they were going to be more sensitive to how they consume that type of content. How does your child wind down in the evening after experiencing screen time, right? How well do they do self-soothing and coming down from something that's going to be a little bit more active? So I think that's important to be aware of. This next one to me, is the most important, and it's what is screen time crowding out for them? Right? It's a question I often ask is how is it serving you to be involved in Roblox, for example, for 2 hours a day during the week and then up to 4 hours on a Saturday or Sunday? And if we add that up, we get up to 18 hours. It's a part-time job. And when we look forward to when that child becomes a young adult, when they're 18, are they going to be glad that they spent I could do the numbers, but right, a part-time job level of time on that particular game. And the last is communication. So how we're communicating with our kids. This is coming from Lisa D'Amour. Lisa D'Amour is a New York Times columnist, really specializing in adolescent and kids' mental health. She's got I think Ask Lisa is her podcast, and she provides this other framework about how do I talk to my children about screens. And really, this I think you can use this as setting limits for your kids. And here's the analogy that I like to think of when we're setting limits with our kids is if we can imagine, right, the dopamine hit is just a river of emotion, right? They get home, they want to get on the screens, and maybe they got to take care of something first. But they've got this river of emotion, and you're going to come in and say no and put down the dam to dam up the water, right? And get in the way of that urge that's happening. And we want to do that in a way, when we set those limits, we want to do it in a way that's non-rupturing. And what I mean by that is if we just come in and say, no, you're not doing that, right? And we've got that stern parental voice tone, still authoritative, you could argue. But that's the way that we approach it. A few different things likely are to happen. One, the water is going to rise up on the dam. You're going to get some more intense resistance than you were expecting. Two, the water's going to find itself a way around the dam. It's going to be sneaky. It's going to find an end around and break the rule or break the limit that's been set. Or three, if you've got a more sensitive child, the water might recede quickly and experience shame, which we also don't want our kids to experience when we're setting limits. And so these four R's, I think, is a way to, to keep in mind as we're setting the limits that we're going to do it out of a place of respect. We got to provide the rationale. Here's why we're setting this limit. Here's the limit. Here's the rule that we're putting in place. And we're doing this because we know, right, the downfall of how of when you spend this much time on a screen or on social media. And embrace some level of resistance, right? Depending upon the age of the child, you may get some resistance. And I think resistance is okay as long as it's respectful, right? And we can answer a couple of questions and we can respond and explain a little bit more. And this is still the rule, right? One of the best ways that I think we have in working with our kids on these limits is providing them with small frequent conversations about how to build their media literacy. What is all this advertisement about? And here's one of the ways that I do it. I'll teach my kids, hey, there's a lot of money being spent on advertising. There's a lot of money being spent on getting you to do this Fortnite thing and downloading new skins. There's a lot of money being spent on Instagram and things like that. And I want to teach you something. I want to teach you the difference between a million and a billion, right? And the difference is if I've got a million seconds and I put them all together, I get like 2.5 weeks. If I get a billion seconds, I get 33 years, maybe 32 and some change. If I get a trillion seconds, I'm up to 33,000 plus. And this year, for the first time in our global history, we're spending $1 trillion on advertisements to get your attention. And how much do you want to be tricked by that $1 trillion, right? So you're building some critical thinking, some awareness, and even distrust, as there should be distrust about how their time is being captured by the devices in the home, right? They're being treated as the commodity or the product, and they can vote with their attention how they want to spend that, right? We can empower the kids that, hey, you're being duped. I get it. I get duped sometimes. We can work against that and be aware of what's happening with this. And I love what David Yeager says. He's one of the researchers in motivation for kids. And he says, right, value young people as independent thinkers rather than treat them as problems to be controlled. So it's not just that we want to control and limit what they're doing. It's that we want them to understand um, how much effort is going into gathering, to capturing their attention. And it's happening all over, right? We can talk about the how the tobacco companies, when they went under, they just gave the form, they bought up food companies like Kraft and Nabisco and created ultra processed foods and figured out flavor profiles that were going to get people addicted. And it was the same thing all over again. Here's an example of a cell phone agreement. This is from momcollective.com. That's in the references document at the end of the handout. This is one of many examples. This is one where I appreciated the language that was in there and felt like it fit the parenting framework that we've discussed tonight. This is something I would do at least weeks before considering getting a cell phone. This is something, I've known people who've done it a year before, and then tracked how their child did on all other areas of technology to explore and prepare for what's it going to be like when this thing is in your pocket. How's that gonna influence you? Um, I've provided here some examples of conversation starters. And again, I think it represents this idea of coming up alongside our kids to help them see what their relationship with technology is. General questions like, how's the digital world been working for you? Hey, tell me about some of the latest drama that's happening. Right. I've told kids there's been a couple of times, and I've been horrified when it's happened, that a text went to, like, my wife's name is Kate. I worked with a teacher whose name was Kate, and I sent her a text message that was, yeah, it wasn't terribly inappropriate, but it was definitely meant for my wife. And it made for, and she was also a good friend. So it ended up being very funny, but I was horrified that it happened, right? What mistakes have they made on social media or on um, um, online, right? Being aware of how they feel after they've watched the shorts for even a half hour. What's reading like if you've got homework left to do after that? What are your thoughts about some fake accounts and when people do that, right? When they create a fake account so that their parents can't see that, those types of questions. So being curious with them. Now, some of you, if you've got some older kids, might be like, "Oh my gosh, what if I have to roll things back?" And I think that you can roll things back. You can do a reset in the home. We had one recently. We do it. I think it would give us a B minus on how we do in the Frampton household. If it were just me, it probably would be a C. I'll credit the B minus to my wife. But we were serendipitously with our three boys all in different schools, all spring breaks lined up. We took advantage of it, went on a trip, and we did a reset on technology. Phones only when needed, and to check in for a few minutes on social, on maintaining some social communication, and not for anything else. Never seen my kids read as much as they did over that past week. And just not yesterday, 2 mornings ago, my ninth grader came down in the morning, got his morning breakfast, sat down near me. I was unfortunately busy working, checking email earlier in the morning, and it was all of a sudden time for him to go to school. And he's like, "Holy cow, I got a lot of time in the morning. I didn't pick up my phone this morning. I didn't realize how much time there is." Right. And it was kind of like this realization of what a time suck these devices can be. So I think using the 4 R's to really set the table for that, thinking about that boundary analogy and prescribing and accepting that there's going to be some respectful resistance that's going to be on your way. You are asking them to be bored. And I want to be clear, bored is hard, particularly today. There was a great research study, and this was with older teens and young adults. But I think our kids, I think this will resonate with you. They were asked to sit in a lab room for 15 minutes and do nothing. The only thing that they had with them was something on their hand that could shock them, and they could self-administer a shock if they so choose. oh, I think it was over 60% of the men during the 15-minute period shocked themselves, and it was more like a quarter of the women, right? Sitting bored has become a very hard thing to do, and it's really important. And with repeated practice, they will find something productive to do with that time. Um, I'm going to skim through this really quickly. There's laws being proposed and coming in both in the state of Illinois and federally to help protect our kids. To me, it's too late, and not enough. I think that there will be more to come. The last thing I'll mention is for AI. For our younger kids, I would avoid it pretty much completely. I just wouldn't want them to know that that idea is there. um, for our younger kids, being able to discern this artificial intelligence and this chatbot from a real human being gets very blurred, and too difficult for them to conceptualize. And it's created really dangerous situations on multiple occasions and it's really created tragedy. And my hope is that we're going to see some major guardrails come up around the use of AI. I do think as kids get older, particularly as they approach later elementary and even especially junior high, that we're using it with them, talking about all of the cons of AI, right? One of them as a believer in social justice. If it's gathering all the information from the past, and a lot of its information isn't going to um, um, uh, be presented in an equitable or a fully representative manner. And that's one example of many as to the downfalls of AI. An incredible tool, but also one that needs to me needs to be restricted for kids up until a certain age. Again, we need to know our child to know when it's okay for them to begin to interact with it. But I would have some supervision and do a whole lot of those small, frequent conversations about it prior to doing that. It's 8:17. I'm going to pause here and make sure that we're able to get to some of our
Questions.
questions.
Yeah. So I'll read a few of them and I'll let you answer. The first one that we had that came in was, can you talk about Apple Watches and the independence kids have making plans to meet and going out and about with them since no one has landlines? What are good boundaries with those?
Yeah, I think, I think that there are settings on the Apple Watches that can be appropriate. Um, the piece that I worry about most with the Apple Watches, and I haven't seen a piece of research that really highlights the Apple Watch specifically, is that there is a communication device on their skin. And how does that detract from their ability to attend? If the research shows that the cell phone out next to me, not even being held or not next to my skin, can detract me from being fully present with somebody, that's the piece that I worry about. I think it makes a whole lot of sense that they're right if they're coordinating. Hey, Joey and Jimmy are going to the playground. They just messaged me. I've got my smartwatch and those types of things, and I'm going to be off and running. I think that it's okay in those situations. I think in situations where we want their full attention, I probably would limit its use. Um, um, again, it's one of those situations where you would want to know your child and how they're going to use it in those different situations.
Thank
Did
you.
I fully answer that question?
I believe so.
Okay.
If not, then the person that asked it, you can
Yeah.
chime in the chat. Somebody had
Perfect.
asked about a link to the agreement. You mentioned that was in the resources in your slides. That's right.
The cell phone agreement, yes, and I'll go to it right now. I think yep, it's the last bullet point on the second page of the references there from momcollective.com. There's a cell phone agreement. Yeah, I would encourage people to create their own so that it's in your, in your language, and even create it with the child. And what a great opportunity to do it in that collaborative way. Then your family values get to show up in it. I would make, and we didn't talk a whole lot about or at all about cyberbullying. I would make that a component on it of here's what we do when we experience it. And then, vice versa, what's my digital citizenship responsibility if I get this device?
Thank you. And we'll share the slides on our website as well for anybody
Perfect.
that wants to go back and reference them. Another question we got in was, it seems like older kids only chat on Snapchat versus texting. So how do you address no social media rules with that so that they don't miss out on the socialization?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a really good question. That was one of our biggest struggles as a family is waiting as long as we could on the Snapchat. And I'm hopeful that legislation is going to come through that's really not going to allow it until, even 16 years of age. And I think that's the recommendation that, like, for example, comes out of Jonathan Haidt's book, is social media platforms need to wait until they're 16. And we know that puberty is done. It's that period of puberty that seems to be really sensitive to a lot of the social comparison and things that happen on social media. The other piece, there's, two other pieces that I can think of. One is, um, getting the other friends to communicate via text and, asking them to make an exception for their child. And I know that that's hard to do, but that's also where the social pact comes in. Snapchat has had a history. My concern with Snapchat is they've had a history of adding some features. I felt like in a very subtle way, and they were features that could be really devastating. There was one, I can't remember the name of it. This was a handful of years ago, where you could provide an image. It was almost like a solar system, and it had some name representative of that. If somebody knows it, throw it in the chat. But it had a solar system, and you could highlight which of your friends were like on the inner orbit and then maybe a little bit outside. And it was just a recipe for social conflict and hurt feelings, because you were going to list somebody. It's very common that I may have a friend that's on my, I think of as in my inner circle, and they feel like I'm on the outside orbit because they've got other friends that they feel like they're, and it doesn't mean that the friendship is wrong or bad. But highlighting it within an app is just was atrocious. I think they got so much lashback as a result of that they took it down. The other piece that I think about with Snapchat that they do with friends, and we want to be really thoughtful of, and I'm probably in the minority on this opinion, is that, and I'll note that I have boys, I don't have girls, and I question would I feel differently. I like to think that I wouldn't. Is do we track the location of our kids? And I just don't believe in doing that. That's not our information. Why would we want that level of supervision where at all times our kids know that we know where they are? Are there certain situations? We went to Lollapalooza for the first time this past summer. I didn't have it. I wished I did. That was one of those moments where I wished where I wished I had it. I don't know that it would have worked anyways in that venue, but um, yeah, the social pact is the thing that's going to help most with something like that. The other piece that obviously you probably already know about Snapchat is they have shorts available there, and so you can get caught up in just watching these endless reels of meaningless videos. That's a hard one. I experienced it, and really the way that we did it is we delayed, and there was some inconvenience. And I remember a full school year. This is with our oldest that there was a lot of frustration, and we held on for as long as we could before we allowed to have it.
Got it. Thank you for that. Another one that we had was, oh, somebody asked if it was recorded. Yes, we did record it. And for those wondering, we will share the recording and the slides on our website and then also in the next family newsletter, which comes out at the beginning of May. But later this week, we'll get it up on our website so anybody can jump over there and check that out too. Another question that we got in was, can you talk about different parenting approaches and values in the house. You and your wife seem to be aligned and able to model.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, so if there's different thoughts about technology use, and I don't think that's uncommon, right? That people have different thoughts about that. What I would think about is what does the science say, and can we compromise somewhere close to what those recommendations are? Right. And if in a couple, right, there's two partners raising kids, um, there may be a parent who's the lead on this issue, right? Who's managing the app, that's managing the time. And as long as there's been that, I think that agreement between the parents, um, about what the limits are, and both parents have each other's back in that limit setting. I think it's okay that one is taking the lead on that, right? As long as everybody's okay with that, and there's a division of roles and ways to contribute to the family culture. Um, the hard part about that is if one parent is modeling something that we wish they weren't. So, I've known parents who were gamers and would go into the basement and play 2 hours as a way to blow off steam. And then there's a 6-year-old in the house who just wants to sit and watch the entire time. And then we've got some negotiating and some things to do to understand what type of impact that might have.
Thank you for that. And we have one more come in. Would you recommend watching this recording with children in somebody's house? They said sometimes the message is ignored due to the messenger.
Hmm. No. Well, I would not watch me ever. You would be welcome to watch it again. I don't think of this presentation as being super kid friendly to consume. I don't have a video in mind for you that would, although I know that there's some out there. Um, I would be concerned if I'm a parent and the message is refusing to be received. I get concerned about what's happening with my authority as a decision maker and the limit setter within the home. And is this particular or specific to technology, or is there other, domains of our family life that this is happening to? And what do I need to do to get the hierarchy back? So that I'm able to protect my kids from the influence of technology in the way that the science is saying that I should. And that's when, sometimes we working with a parent consultant, sometimes just talking to close friends or family, sometimes talking to a therapist, whatever support is needed in that moment.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Another one just came in. Any tips
great.
on how to raise awareness to other parents who aren't on the same boat about technology?
Yeah, no, I think that's good. It's a good question. I think this tonight, that's the purpose of why District 34 was doing tonight, is to alert as many parents as we can. I think some of that can happen through word of mouth. I think some of it's going to happen, and why I'm so grateful that some policy is coming, is to make it law that kids aren't accessing social media, that there's age gating happening. I think 13 is the target right now. And so just you can have, I think, curious conversations with people who are in your social arena or in your school parent community, to be curious with them what their thoughts are about it, and to really, I think, gently share what your knowledge is on the topic. I have an opinion that, and it's another sports analogy, but if somebody's swinging the golf club and you can see exactly what they're doing wrong, you do not share it, unless you're asked to, because it's not going to be received well. And I think about parenting in that same way, that unless I'm asking for help, I'm not, unless somebody's asking for help, I'm not going to provide it. That being said, if somebody's in my social arena and we're hanging out, in the pickup line at school, and we're having small talk, and I say, hey, at this presentation, we were able to see it. No, it was interesting. Here's a couple things kind of that came up. What do you think about that, right? You're approaching it in a curious kind of introductory way without telling them anything that needs to happen. Um, but I think through some of the public policy, that's going to become a lot easier. And yeah, I think showing up in a curious way with your acquaintances or friends to try and get folks on the same page. And there will be people who just won't be, right? There will be people who, are going to deny the information that we have and are going to make the decisions that they see fit. And then we have to think about, I think one of the hardest things is when right, particularly if you have, for example, an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old who gets invited to a birthday sleepover, and you know that the parents are really permissive about technology use and how they're going to be gaming all night long and or have free access to the internet all night long. There's a really hard decision to be had there as a parent. And would they that's probably a time when you would be more pointed about your questions, to make sure that they're not going to get exposed to something. I think the average age now of exposure to pornography on the internet, I believe it's still 9 years old. I don't think it's gone down to 8 yet. But gosh, that's a fourth grade, and that's where it happens, right? When there's an older sibling around and there's a sleepover or something along those lines. And so I think they're worthwhile questions to ask.
All right, we had a couple of, somebody did say that there is a wait till 8th Glenview chapter. So there's families that have signed that. So if anybody's interested, I believe you can just type in wait till 8 Glenview, and there's information there. And then part of the other question that they had asked was about teaching in our schools and programs for discussing it with children. So again, I just wanted to mention that although we are focusing on technology use in the home tonight, we do a lot of digital citizenship training and skill training with students so that they learn how to responsibly use their tools that they have, so their iPads at school. And we do focus a lot about that safety and training and teaching on, how to determine when things are real and how to do all of that digital citizenship. So we do a lot of that training within the school system as well. Another person asked, is there any programs or softwares that you suggest to be more productive in the age of technology?
I would need some clarification about productive in doing which task, unless I misunderstood the question. What I wonder if they're wondering about that technology that might be helpful in supporting screen time.
The person that asked the question, if you just clarify for us a little bit,
Yeah, thank you.
that would be great. And then I will share this chat to everybody. Somebody sent where you can find more information about Wait Till 8 in Glenview if you're interested. So we'll get that one second. It's just in
Yeah,
case
no
they want
problem.
to clarify.
Yep. And
Okay.
what? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, are there any programs or softwares that you suggest to be more productive in the age of technology, skill development like coding? So maybe some softwares that you would suggest if
Hmm.
somebody is looking to do more skill development online.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a good question. And with coding, I wouldn't consider myself super knowledgeable about coding websites. And where my mind honestly goes, my ninth grader is in a computer science class and was working on a coding homework assignment just last night. And we were having the conversation about how obsolete that skill is becoming, and that's where a point where AI is going to come into play for us in a pretty dramatic way. So I would say I don't know of a coding program or something that is, increasing digital skills in a really nice way. I think that there's a lot of products, for like another example of coding, right there. I think there's a lot of what was it, like Bob the Robot, like where with an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, they can learn how to code the movements of the robot and things like that. But I don't have one off the top of my head.
Okay. I'm not seeing any additional questions come in, but there were
Okay.
a few people that did just say thank you for the presentation. So I would just like to reiterate that as well. This has been a great evening, and we really appreciate you spending the time and teaching us and letting us learn from you tonight, Dr. Frampton. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, everybody, for spending the night with me.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for attending. We appreciate it.
Have a good night.